The Duggar family has survived scandals that would have destroyed any other public figure. They've weathered investigations, headlines, and courtroom verdicts. And every single time, they found a way to keep the machine running. But here's what's different this time. A judge asked for something the Duggar family has never been truly forced to give. Not a statement, not a press release carefully worded by a spokesperson. The truth, unfiltered, under oath. And when the one person they needed to stay quiet finally looked up, everything they had spent years carefully building started to shake. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is not just a family drama. It is a cover-up timeline, and it goes deeper than anything this family has ever had to face before. If this is the kind of content that makes you lean forward in your chair, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to Jenny Exposes, and ring that notification bell. Because every video in this series goes one layer deeper, and you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about how we got here. To understand what's happening with Joseph and Kendra Duggar right now, you first have to understand the operating system of the entire Duggar family. And I mean that literally there is a system. It has been documented. It has been reported on. It has been confirmed in courtrooms and in congressional records. This is not speculation. This is a public record. When Josh Duggar's abuse of his sisters and another young girl first came to light publicly in 2015, the world was horrified. But here's what the world didn't fully absorb at the time. The family had known for over a decade. Over a decade. That information was handled internally. It was brought to a family friend, a man with connections to law enforcement, and it was quietly buried. There was no therapist. There was no licensed professional. There was a family council. There was church mediation. And there was a unified decision that this would stay inside the walls of the Duggar household. That is the playbook. That is the system. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it when you look at everything else this family has done since. Because the Josh Duggar situation was not a one-time failure of judgment. It was a demonstration of how this family operates under pressure. The formula is simple. Manage it internally, control the public narrative, smile for the cameras, and wait for the news cycle to move on. And for years, for literal decades, it worked. The show kept running, the brand kept growing, the speaking engagements kept coming, and millions of people watched 19 kids and counting and saw a wholesome, faith-filled American family living out their values on screen. But here is the thing about systems built on concealment. They are only as strong as the weakest point of pressure. And courtrooms, real courtrooms, with real judges who have real authority, are the single greatest source of pressure that any cover-up can face. You cannot script a deposition the way you can script a television interview. You cannot rehearse a judge the way you can rehearse a public apology. And you absolutely cannot control what happens when someone who has been institutionally silenced is finally asked directly, on the record, what they know. That brings us to Kendra Duggar. Now, I want to be careful here because Kendra is not a villain in this story. I want you to hold that. What Kendra Caldwell became when she married into the Duggar family at 19 years old was something much more complicated than a willing participant in a cover-up. She became a woman operating inside an institution. And that institution, the Duggar family, their church community, their extended social network, their entire cultural framework, had one consistent message for women in her position. Handle it inside. Stay quiet outside. Smile for the cameras. Think about the architecture of what surrounds a young woman in that environment. Her church tells her that submission to her husband is a spiritual obligation. Her in-laws, the most powerful figures in that entire world, model a version of family life where every conflict is resolved behind closed doors and every public statement is carefully curated. Her own family, the Caldwells, are deeply embedded in the same cultural and religious framework. There is no neutral party. There is no outside voice saying, "Wait, you have options. Wait, you have rights. Wait, this is not normal." For years, that system held. Joseph and Kendra appeared on social media with their children. They gave interviews that stayed firmly within the approved narrative. They maintained the public-facing version of a young Duggar couple building a life together in the tradition of everything Jim Bob and Michelle modeled. Clean, controlled, curated. And then something shifted. The first sign that cracks were forming came quietly, the way these things always do at first. Social media posts slowed down. Appearances that had been announced were quietly removed from schedules. A vague statement from a family-adjacent account that said something along the lines of asking for privacy during a difficult season. That phrase, a difficult season, is the linguistic fingerprint of the Duggar family's public relations instinct. It says everything and nothing at the same time. It signals to the audience that something is happening while giving away none of the details that might be legally or reputationally damaging. If you've followed this family long enough, you know exactly what that language sounds like. You've heard it before. You heard it in 2015. You heard it after Josh's conviction. You heard it every time the family needed to acknowledge pressure without surrendering control of the story. But this time, the quiet statements weren't enough. Because this time, there was a courtroom involved. And in a courtroom, a judge does not accept the phrase difficult season as an answer to a direct question. Let me give you my theory. And I want you to hear me out fully before you decide what you think, because this one is layered. My theory is that the legal matter involving Joseph and Kendra is not just about Joseph and Kendra. In tightly controlled family systems, and I mean systems like this one, where loyalty to the family unit is treated as equivalent to religious obligation, one legal case can become a threat. And if that thread gets pulled by the right person, with the right authority, in the right setting, it can unravel the entire fabric. Here is why that matters specifically in this context. Kendra Duggar is not just a wife. She is a witness to the internal life of the Duggar family, at a time when that family is already under intense legal and public scrutiny. What she has observed, what she has been present for, what she has been asked to stay quiet about, none of that exists in isolation. It connects to a much larger picture. And the people who are most invested in keeping that picture from being seen clearly are not just Joseph. They are everyone above Joseph in the family hierarchy. And that brings me to a name that keeps coming up, as it always does when you trace the power structure of this family back to its source. Bob Duggar. Bob is not a passive figure in any of this. He has been the architect of the Duggar family's public presence since the very beginning. He negotiated the television deals. He controlled the family's public statements during the 2015 scandal. He was named specifically in reporting around how Josh Duggar's abuse was handled before it became public. Bob Duggar does not just lead this family, he manages it, like a brand, like an asset. And when you look at Joseph's behavior through that lens, something interesting happens. You start to ask if Joseph is acting on his own instincts, or is he acting within a framework that was built for him long before he ever made a single decision as an adult? Because the pattern of behavior, the internal resolution, the management of the narrative, the unified family front, that is not something Joseph invented. That is something he was raised inside of. He is, in a very real sense, a product of the same system that produced Josh. Not the same outcomes, let me be clear about that, but the same formation, the same training, the same reflex to protect the family structure above all other considerations. That is a generational accountability story. And it is one that the courtroom is now positioned to force into the open in a way that no journalist, no documentary, and no social media thread has been able to do before. Now, I want to take you into what that courtroom moment might have looked like, and I want to be completely transparent with you. What I'm about to describe is a dramatized reconstruction. This is a fan theory scenario. It is not a transcript of actual proceedings. It is my interpretation, based on the documented dynamics of this family and the known facts of how family court proceedings work when patterns of control and institutional silence are at issue. I'm telling you this up front because I respect your intelligence, and I want you to trust this channel. What follows is clearly labeled as dramatized, but it is grounded in everything I've just walked you through. Imagine the courtroom. Joseph's attorney is prepared. The family strategy is the same one it has always been. Minimize, redirect, request privacy. The attorney opens with the familiar framing. This is a private family matter. These are decisions made within a marriage. These are questions best addressed outside of a public proceeding. And the judge stops them. The judge looks at the attorney and says it stopped being a private family matter the moment it entered my courtroom. Counsel, sit down. And then the judge turns, not to the attorneys, not to the family representatives seated in the gallery, directly to Kendra. And the judge says, "I'm asking you, not your husband, not your attorney, you." And in that moment, for possibly the first time in years, Kendra Duggar is in a room where the institution cannot protect itself by speaking for her. That is the crack in the wall. That is the moment the cover-up stops being a cover-up and starts being evidence. This is where we are. This is the moment the timeline has been building toward. And what happens next is what Kendra says, what gets entered into the record, what threads get pulled from the larger fabric of this family's history. That is what the rest of this series is going to track in real time. Because here is what most people don't understand about cover-ups in high-profile religious families. They don't collapse all at once. They don't fall apart in one dramatic moment where someone stands up and says, "I'm going to tell the truth now." That is not how this works. What actually happens is quieter, and in many ways, it is more devastating. The collapse happens in layers. It happens in the small moments: a document file that wasn't supposed to be public, a statement that contradicts a previous statement, a date on a record that doesn't line up with the official timeline the family has been offering. And suddenly, the architecture of the cover-up becomes visible, not because someone tore it down, but because the weight of its own inconsistencies finally became too much for it to hold. And that is exactly what we are watching happen right now with the Duggar family. Not a sudden explosion, a slow, structural failure. And for anyone who has been paying attention, the signs have been there for a long time. Let me take you back further, because I think there is a piece of this story that is not getting enough attention, and it has to do with what it actually means to grow up inside the Duggar family system. Not as Jim, Bob, and Michelle's child, but as someone who married into it. Kendra Caldwell was 19 years old when she married Joseph Duggar. 19. She came from a family that shared the same theological framework, the same cultural values, the same understanding of gender roles and family structure. So when she walked into the Duggar world, she didn't experience it as foreign. She experienced it as an intensified version of everything she had already been taught was correct. That is important, because it means the conditioning wasn't something imposed on her from outside. It was something she brought with her and then had amplified by one of the most powerful and controlling family systems in American evangelical culture. What happens to a woman in that position when something goes wrong in her marriage? She does not have a framework for resistance. She does not have a theological language for saying this is wrong, and I am allowed to say so. What she has is a community that tells her that endurance is virtue, that submission is obedience to God, that going public would damage not just her family, but her testimony, her faith community, and the entire structure of relationships that make up her entire social world. She's not just risking a marriage, she's risking everything she has ever known. That is not a weakness. I want to be very clear about that. That is the predictable result of a system specifically designed to make resistance feel impossible. And it is a system that the Duggar family has benefited from, financially, reputationally, and legally for decades. Now here is where the story gets more complex. Because Joseph Duggar is not simply a perpetrator in a straightforward narrative, I am not here to tell you that he is purely a villain and Kendra is purely a victim. Because the reality of what happens inside these family systems is more textured than that. Joseph was also formed by this system. Joseph also grew up in an environment where the Duggar family's needs, the brand, the image, the narrative, came before the individual, where conflict was handled internally, where the external world was viewed with suspicion, and the family circle was the only legitimate source of guidance and authority. Does that excuse any harm that may have been done? Absolutely not. But it does explain something crucial about why these situations are so difficult to resolve outside of a courtroom. Because both the person causing harm and the person experiencing it often share the same fundamental belief that the answer is internal, that outside intervention is a betrayal, that the right move is to handle it in the family, in the church, behind closed doors. And that shared belief is exactly what the Duggar family's institutional power depends on. It is the reason the playbook has worked for so long. As long as both parties believe the same thing about how problems should be handled, the system holds. The moment one of them stops believing it, the moment one of them decides that outside authority is not a betrayal but a lifeline, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. Which brings us back to the courtroom, and to that moment when the judge spoke directly to Kendra. Because here's the thing about a judge asking you directly, with no family member present to answer for you, with no attorney managing your response, with no cultural framework telling you that silence is holiness. It changes something. It creates a space that the Duggar system simply cannot fill. And when a woman who has spent years operating inside a system of institutional silence is suddenly placed in that space, you do not know what is going to come out, and neither does the family. And that uncertainty, that loss of control over the narrative, is the single most dangerous thing that has ever happened to the Duggar family's carefully managed public image. Let me tell you what I think is most likely happening behind closed doors right now. Because I've studied this family's behavior long enough to recognize the patterns, and those patterns are speaking very clearly at this moment. The first thing the family does when a legal case poses a threat to the larger structure is they consolidate. Communications get channeled through a single trusted intermediary. Public statements, if there are any, become even more vague and even more spiritually framed. The emphasis shifts from defending against the specific accusations to reframing the entire situation as a spiritual battle, a test of faith, an attack from outside forces that don't understand the family's values. This is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate rhetorical strategy that serves a very specific function. It transforms a legal and factual dispute into a theological one, and in doing so, it makes the family's followers feel that questioning the official narrative is equivalent to questioning God. That is a powerful move. It has worked before. It worked after 2015. It worked to a significant degree even after Josh Duggar's conviction. Because there is a segment of this audience, a loyal, faith-committed segment, that will accept the spiritual framing and disengage from the factual record. And the family knows that. They are counting on it. But here's what is different this time. This time, the factual record is being established in a courtroom. And a courtroom does not respond to spiritual framing. A judge does not accept testimony that says God has already handled this. The legal system operates on evidence, on documentation, on cross-examination. And once something enters that system, once it is on the record, under oath, with attorneys on both sides whose professional obligation is to pursue the truth, the Duggar family's usual tools become largely useless. They cannot call in a favor with a family friend who has law enforcement connections. They cannot negotiate privately with the other party and make the paper trail disappear. They cannot issue a vague statement asking for privacy and trust that the cameras will move on. Because this time, there is a judge. And a judge has authority that Bob Duggar simply does not have. Now, I want to give you 3 possible futures for how this plays out. And I genuinely want to know what you think because my audience is one of the most perceptive communities on this platform, and I have learned things from your comments that have shaped the direction of this entire series. The first possibility is this. The family successfully manages the narrative. The case settles quietly, behind closed doors, with a non-disclosure agreement that keeps the specific details out of the public record. Kendra returns to or remains in the family structure, and the official story becomes one of reconciliation, healing, and faith. The family absorbs the damage, the audience is offered a redemption arc, and the machine keeps running. This has happened before with this family. It is the outcome they have the most experience with engineering. And if it happens, it will not mean the truth was resolved. It will mean the truth was purchased. The second possibility is that Kendra speaks. Not in a courtroom necessarily, but publicly. An interview, a statement, a documentary, a carefully timed social media post that says just enough to make the broader picture visible. And if that happens, if Kendra, with her specific knowledge of the internal life of this family at this specific point in its history, decides to speak on the record, the reverberations will go far beyond her marriage. Because she is not just a wife, she is an eyewitness. And the Duggar family has far more to fear from an eyewitness than from any journalist, any documentary filmmaker, or any online commentator, including me. If Kendra speaks, the entire structure of how this family has managed its reputation for the last 2 decades comes under a microscope. Not just Joseph, not just their marriage, everything. The financial arrangements, the decision-making about the show, the handling of the Josh Duggar situation before 2015, the role of Jim Bob and Michelle in shaping the responses of their adult children to legal and personal crises. All of it becomes relevant context. All of it becomes potentially discoverable. That is not a small thing. That is potentially the most consequential development in the public history of this family. The third possibility, and this is the one I find most intriguing, and also the one I think most people are underestimating, is that something emerges that reframes the entire story. A document, a record, a statement from someone adjacent to the family who has been quiet until now. Something that changes not just how we understand this specific situation, but how we understand the years that led to it. Because cover-ups of this scale, maintained for this long, do not stay sealed forever. They develop fractures, and sometimes those fractures open from directions no one anticipated. I genuinely do not know which of these three features is coming, but I know that all three of them are more likely today than they were a year ago. And that is because of what happened in that courtroom. That moment when the judge turned to Kendra and said, "I'm asking you," that moment moved the needle. It created a reality that the Duggar family could not have fully prepared for. And whatever comes next, it is going to come from that moment. So I am asking you right now, in the comments, which outcome do you think is most likely? Vote A, B, or C. And don't just drop a letter, tell me why. Tell me what you're seeing, what you're reading, what your instincts are telling you. Because this is not a passive viewing experience on this channel. This is a community that is actually working through this together. And the best analysis I've seen on this story has come directly from the people watching these videos and thinking critically about what they're seeing. As the family manages it, it settles quietly. The narrative gets controlled one more time. B. Kendra speaks, and everything the family has worked to protect becomes visible. C. Something new emerges that changes the entire frame of this story. Vote in the comments, pin your reason, because I read every single one. Now here's what I need you to understand about why this channel exists and why this series matters beyond the drama of one family's very public unraveling. What the Duggar family represents in terms of the intersection of institutional religion, media power, and the suppression of individual truth is not unique to them. They are the most visible example of a pattern that exists in communities across this country, across this world. The formula to manage it internally, control the external narrative, protect the institution above the individual, that formula does not belong only to the Duggars. It belongs to every institution that has ever decided that its own reputation is worth more than the well-being of the people inside it. And the reason it matters when a judge breaks through that formula, when a courtroom forces the question out into the open air, where it cannot be managed or reframed or spiritualized away, is because it demonstrates that the formula has limits. That institutional silence is not permanent. That there exists in the structure of this society a mechanism that can reach inside even the most controlled and closed family system and ask the one question that the institution cannot answer for you. What is the truth? Not your family's version, not your church's version, not the version that has been carefully constructed over decades by a man who understood from the very beginning that controlling the narrative was the same as controlling the outcome. The actual truth. Yours. In your own words. Under oath. That is what is at stake here. Not ratings, not gossip, not the entertainment value of watching a famous family fall apart. The question of whether someone who has been systematically silenced by an institution built to protect itself, whether that person gets to finally speak and be heard and have what they say matter in a setting where the institution has no power to rewrite it. That is the story. That is why I'm here. And that is why you're going to want to be here for every single piece of what comes next. Because we are not at the end of this. We are somewhere in the middle. And the middle of a story like this, when the pressure is building, when the system is straining, when the people at the center of it are running out of room to maneuver the middle, is where everything that matters actually happens. Every video in this series is going to go one layer deeper. We are going to track the timeline in real time. We are going to look at the documents, the public records, the statements, and the silences, because the silences tell you just as much as the statements do, if you know how to read them. And I am going to walk you through all of it, step by step, with full transparency about what is documented fact, what is credible theory, and what is my own analysis. If you are not subscribed to Jenny Exposes right now, this is the moment. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell so you get the notification the second the next video drops. Because when this story breaks open, and it is going to break open, I want you to already be here. I want you to already have the context. I want you to be the person in the room who understood what was happening before everyone else caught up. Like this video if it gave you something to think about. Share it with someone who has been following this family and wants a deeper analysis. And drop your vote in the comments A, B, or C, and tell me what you think comes next. I'm Jenny, this is Jenny Exposes, and we are just getting started.